Welcome back to the show where we run you through all the Dolphins news you need to know about. After you see the news you need to know about, we run you through the fan who can answer fans' questions. There is so much to talk about on today's show, to the point where it's going to be a longer episode, that's for sure. A very divisive week, I would say, for the last few days for Dolphins fans. I've never seen such differing opinions on things in a while, I would say. But let's start with the big news. Obviously, the Dolphins and Steelers make a huge trade. And I don't know where to even begin, because there's so many different angles to this trade that are so interesting. But the Dolphins trade this comes from Pro Football Rumors. Dolphins trade with the Pittsburgh Steelers, Jalen Ramsey and Jonnu Smith. The Dolphins receive Minkah Fitzpatrick. There was a late round draft swap in there, which who cares? And obviously, I don't know where to start with this. Giving up Jalen Ramsey and Jonnu Smith for Minkah Fitzpatrick. So let's start with, I don't know where we start with this trade, because there's so many things that go into it. I guess we'll start with like the Jalen Ramsey part of it. And really why I think this is a really, really good trade. It sucks. I think well, maybe we start the negative. Like, it sucks getting rid of Jonnu Smith. And maybe we'll save that for another thing, because obviously the Dolphins ended up making another weird trade. So I guess we'll just stick with the Jalen Ramsey part of it. The fact, and a lot of this was reported by a lot of different people, that at least GMs around the league were surprised that we got anything out of the trade, which is where I am with it. When I first read the news, I was so excited about it, because I was like, I can't believe Chris Greer somehow flipped someone who was never going to play it down for the Dolphins again. And we got a lot of, actual reporting from beat writers on that in the last few days, which we're going to talk about here in a second, which is very interesting. Actual, instead of innuendos, actual credible, reasons why the Dolphins and Jalen Ramsey's relationship deteriorated as much as it did. So, taking into account all of those things, how this has been, 2 or 3 months long, even more than that, it was before the draft, months long battle between the two parties. Most organizations, and I honestly expecting us to either cut him or just get rid of him, as a contract dump, get nothing pretty much in return. Maybe we get lucky with the contract dump. It was been reported multiple times that nobody even wanted to take on his contract. So, and we talked about this too. The Dolphins don't have any, for the first time in a long time, when you think about the history of the franchise and over the years, but especially for this particular team, they don't have any building blocks in the secondary. There's nobody that they can really count on, that they know that they're going to get good production out of. And they got rid of someone like in Javon Holland who could have been that, they're like, okay, this is someone that they can build around. This is someone that they can feel good about going into the year. And they had nothing. I mean, I for months, I think for most Dolphins fans, I pretty much just was like, Jalen Ramsey's not on the team anymore, for the most part. I don't think it felt like we didn't know what was going to happen with him, but he wasn't a Dolphin. So it's weird that for some people this has become a reality. Everybody's like, oh, their cornerback room is whatever. But it's like, yeah, well, we've known this for months. And to get an all-pro player back who's younger and still in his 20s, he's only 28 years old. And this is even more heightened for me, because he was one of my favorite draft picks that the Dolphins have made in a very, very long time. And he's one of my favorite players that we've picked, because he was one of my favorite players in the draft. And I loved his rookie season as a Dolphins fan. I thought he played really well. I mean, we didn't even get to see him in 2019 because he was obviously frustrated with the direction that the team was going in. And, I think Omar Kelly paints it in a weird light where it's like, oh, well, he gave up on the team. But, I don't think he gave up. I think he was just upset that it's like, okay, we're trying to lose. And I don't think he's a locker room issue. I mean, from all accounts, from Steelers, beat writers, and people who have covered that team, and from what I've read, he's one of the best leaders in football. He's dedicated. He's a hard worker. And I think that's a better I think those are all positive things. So I don't think we're going to have to worry about that with him. And I'm just happy that he's back in a Dolphins uniform. He's one of my favorite players in the NFL. He was one of my favorite players when we picked him. As soon as we drafted him, it's one of the... Honestly, I think that's the only time I've ever just... Other than maybe Tua, that I've just gotten a jersey right after he was drafted. So that's really rare. Him, I would say my 3 favorite draft picks that I really wanted over the last, 10 years would probably be Jalen Phillips, Tua, and Minkah Fitzpatrick. So for me, this is a big deal. I'm very excited about it. And again, it did blow my mind that Chris Greer somehow pulled this off. And I don't understand the whole backlash of we lost Jalen Ramsey. To me, he never solved any of the issues that the Dolphins had. He just added to them. We didn't beat Buffalo. Anytime we played a good team, he had bad games, especially against the Bills. He had that one tipped interception. That was it. They still dropped 30 on us. So it's not like Jalen Ramsey was making that big of an impact. And he's older. So it's we can't build. He can't be a building block. And he can't be the highest paid corner on that kind of salary plan like that. So to me, and the off the field issues. The fact, and we'll get into this right now. I think it's a good time. Reportedly, he was always late. And this is from multiple sources, multiple beat writers, specifically Joe Shad. He was always late. Apparently he had fights with Vic Fangio. He was one of the reasons Sam Madison got fired, who was obviously a great Dolphin and our defensive backs coach for a long time. And that's the reason him and Mike McDaniel clashed so much, is because he was always late. So he's had this issue with other teams and franchises before. So to me, this is obviously, I think a big monkey off Mike McDaniel's back, and I think it's just good for the team overall. I'm actually quite happy with what Chris Greer ended up doing, and somehow flipped this into a first-team All-Pro player who's only 28 years old. That's pretty awesome. So I'm a big fan of this trade. I think, and we're about to talk about the Jonnu Smith part of this here in a second, but I think this is a phenomenal move by the Dolphins. And one thing that really frustrated me was you can really tell who it's okay, the Steelers are a much more popular franchise, and at least I guess they just are, because that's the only side everybody was talking about. But yeah, this gives the Dolphins a player that they can build around. Like I said, Jalen Ramsey was already in his 30s. This is someone who can play at a high level for at least the next 3 seasons. So he's a piece that can be built around, as opposed to someone who's more of a win now player like Jalen Ramsey, whose play is starting to drop. And it is. And especially at that salary, it's kind of crazy. And the Dolphins, the Steelers pay most of his salary at least this season, which I think the Dolphins are currently now 28th in cap space. They have $13 million in cap, so it gives them leverage to go out and get maybe a younger corner. I know a lot of people want Asante Samuel Jr. I think that's the best case scenario, and if they can add a player like that, I feel like their secondary is much, much, much more improved and is better for the foreseeable future. And so I think this is a great, great, great move by the Dolphins. Now, the bad part of this trade was the Jonnu Smith. I love Jonnu Smith. I think he's a very unique talent. His ability to separate in short areas is very unique and special. His run after the catch, I think he's the best run after the catch tight end in football. I think you could probably argue that him and Brock Bowers are the 2 tight ends that I would say are the best at it. I think George Kittle's somewhere in there, but he's not as athletic as those 2 anymore. So he's so unique in that way. And I don't think you can replace him, no matter who the Dolphins were going to get, even if it was a player like Kyle Pitts. That he's just very unique in that way. And he fit a lot like what the Dolphins like to do with the screens. So I think this is a bigger loss than... It's a big loss because he was such a big part of an offense that had to lean heavily on him because there was an injured Waddle, weird Tyreek Hill season that didn't make a whole lot of sense from with all the off the field issues and the quarterback injuries. So, you know, it just sucks that we had to lose a player like him. But if it was me, I would have made this trade. I think it's really rare you get a player in his prime at the top of his game. And I know he didn't have the best season last year, but he had some injuries last year. But this is a player that can make another first team All-Pro, and especially within Anthony Weaver's defense, I think it's a phenomenal fit. They're going to play him at safety, and not move him around, which is what Pittsburgh had him doing, which, he doesn't like to do. And I think that, covering a lot of holes in a defense, and hopefully they don't do that. From what I've read, that's not what the Dolphins are going to do with them. And I'm very excited to match him up with the front seven that we have, with a great defensive coach. And now it just comes down to, can the Dolphins find good young talent in Cam Smith and Ethan Bonner and Storm Duck and players like that? Kader Coe, who's probably going to play the slot. So I'm excited for this preseason to see how all things shape up, and maybe the Dolphins go get a corner. But I think this is a great move for now and in the future, because I think Minkah Fitzpatrick has a lot more high-level football left. And I actually think he's still, in my opinion, the best safety in the NFL, or at least a top 3. I don't think you can argue that he's easily top 3 safety in football. And I don't think Jalen Ramsey is that player anymore, and at his position at least. And he's also older. So I love this trade. And let's move on to the next news story, which I think is interesting. I guess we'll start with some of the other stuff. We'll start with this. Raheem Mostert tweeted how the Dolphins don't take care of their own when they traded Jonnu Smith. And Omar Kelly tweeted a bunch of tweets about this. I do think that it is weird that they don't re-sign, and they've had a history of this even before Chris Greer, that they don't re-sign players that often, that have, especially players that they've drafted. It's very strange. I don't really know what to say about that. I don't know. Jonnu Smith, though, is different. I'm more mad at Christian Wilkins and Javon Holland and the decision to pay other players like Jalen Ramsey over them, I think, is the thing that makes me more upset. Jonnu Smith was an older player who they had on a one-year deal, who did not have a great career. He had a disappointing career up until that point. He got into the Mike McDaniel offense, and he succeeded. And I don't, it sucks. He was I think a fan favorite, but it doesn't, to say that, I don't think that specific situation. I think I can give Chris Greer a little bit more okay, I understand why maybe he's more reluctant to pay a player like that, especially if you can flip him for a player like Minkah Fitzpatrick. But yeah, I guess I kind of agree. It is a weird kind of through line if you're a Dolphins fan. It is strange. I don't know. Chris Greer is a weird guy. It's hard, when I think about the body of work of Chris Greer, I think to myself, he's phenomenal at drafting. I think he's had some very good draft classes, and he's made some very good trades too. And I think this is one of them. I actually really like this trade. But especially to get rid of, and I guess I'm just repeating myself, but to flip a player like that that's already unhappy for a first team All-Pro is pretty impressive. So let's move on to the next news story, because this is a super strange thing that I'm not gonna lie, we're gonna get into this, okay? Dolphins trade, this comes from Pro Football Rumors. Dolphins acquired tight end Darren Waller from the New York Giants. So they didn't give up anything for him. They literally gave up. It was literally another draft pick swap. They swapped a 6th and 7th rounder. They gave him, so at least for the contract, Darren Waller's on a 1-year, $5 million deal, which is not guaranteed. Most of that is incentives. So basically, I think when you want to go through the roller coaster that was this at the time. It's like, okay, the Dolphins make a great move, in my opinion, for Minka Fitzpatrick. Very happy about that. But how are they going to replace the tight end? How are they going to replace Johnny Smith, and how are they going to add to the tight end room? Tom Pelissero, immediately after the Pittsburgh trade went through, said the Dolphins are in contact with multiple teams to acquire a tight end. So everybody's mind is racing, like, okay, Kyle Pitts, Michael Mayer. Who else was up there? It was like, there was a bunch of tight ends that were like, okay, maybe they could do this or that or that or this. So they end up getting Darren Waller. Now, this is a weird trade because I don't know how to feel about it. I think I'm going to be honest with you, it gives me a lot of Odell Beckham vibes from last year. This is a player with a very strange weird off the field stuff going on. Very, like, I don't know, he seems like a very strange dude. Obviously, this is a guy who has had a tumultuous career with football when it comes to dedication to it. Early in his career, he overcame alcoholism. Shout out to him. To stay sober and to focus on football, and he did that. He had a very successful run there and was one of the most dominant playmakers in the NFL. Then he gets to New York, where he is on a really bad he's just on a bad football team in general. He's had in that 2 seasons there with the Raiders and Giants, he dealt with a lot of injuries, and a lot of people questioned whether or not he's dedicated to football. That's been widely reported. And even he did an interview where he said in the middle of a game where he was playing the Buffalo Bills, he literally said, "What am I doing with my life?" in the interview when he was out there on the football field. So this is a player that has had a lack of focus, which is why Odell Beckham failed miserably with the Dolphins. He was more interested in his fashion line than he was playing football. So that is concerning, and he took an entire season off. But this is a player who's 32 years old, who is 6'5", and is a phenomenal route runner. It doesn't matter. He could play receiver if he wanted to. He could literally play the X position if he really, really wanted to. And he's a phenomenal talent. He's 6'5", and we talked about this with Johnny Smith, has the innate ability to separate in short areas, where he ran a lot of West Coast receiver routes and was dominant. He's not a physical after the catch type of a player, even though he can turn up field. He's very fast when it comes to that. So there is rack ability, but it's not more traditional, like Johnny Smith. I'm going to run you over, George Kittle, physical. So that's not really his game. I don't think the Dolphins are going to throw him a lot of screens. He's going to be like a big receiver in the slot and on the outside, which, if he can tap into that Raiders Darren Waller, he's a very unique unicorn type of player. Huge, he's great, dude. You want to talk about watching someone catch the football? It is his ability to catch the football is up there with some of the best in the NFL. It really, really is. A ball barely hits the ground. He's always catching the ball in momentum, which is great. You see a lot of receivers nowadays jump and catch the football, and Jalen Waddle has had a lot of issues with that, but he's a natural catcher of the football, and that's going to really help the Dolphins in the red zone. And like I said, he reminds me a lot of Brandon Marshall. The way that he moves and catches the football and the way that he plays the game. Obviously, he's not a receiver. He's a tight end, but he reminds me a lot of Brandon Marshall. What are the Dolphins getting in Darren Waller? Can he tap into the Raiders side of things? I don't know. And like I said, it gives me a lot of Odell Beckham vibes from last year, which is kind of unfortunate. But listen, I'm excited to watch him in a Dolphins uniform. In this offense, with that much space in the middle of the field, with his talent and his versatility to be able to line up in a lot of different positions, is really interesting. And some of the stuff that, Tua has never really had a big target like this. This is a physical freak of a talent who can do a lot of different things and can dominate in the middle of the field and in the red zone. And Tua has not had that. So I'm excited to see what that looks like in this offense with Tua throwing him the football. That does get me excited, but it's just is he dedicated to football? Honestly, and if you go back, and I watched a lot of Darren Waller before I did this podcast because I was like, okay, let me watch his year with the Giants and the year before that with the Raiders. Physically, he still's got it. I've seen a lot of people say that, oh, he looked what. They're literally just looking at his numbers. Physically, he barely. By the way, he barely played for the Giants last year, but physically, he still has it. At least when I was watching him with the Giants. Now he's taken a whole year off, but and that might be a good thing for him. But he still is a physically gifted player, and with this new offensive line, and Malik Washington in year 2, and Westbrook and Nikine, and some of those free agent additions. And you know what? I don't want to get sucked into the hype of Darren Waller and then him not do anything, just like Odell Beckham didn't do anything. But I'm excited to see what Mike McDaniel can do with Darren Waller. And I want to say this too. This goes back. Before he was traded to New York, the Dolphins almost got a deal done with him for him to become a Dolphin. And I don't know if anybody remembers this, but Frank Smith used to coach him. Our offensive coordinator used to coach him in Oakland. And the Dolphins almost acquired him in a trade right before he was traded to the Giants. So this is a player that they have wanted for a long time. And maybe this is, I don't know, I'm excited to see this. And I know a lot of people have brought up his age. A lot of tight ends, a great example of this is Zach Ertz last year for the Washington Commanders. There have been a lot of tight ends throughout the history of the league that have played really, really well at a high level at an older age. Another one to bring up is Tony Gonzalez as well. And like I said, he hasn't lost any of his athletic gifts, unless he's just been eating pizza and hasn't worked. I don't know. I'm sure that they've definitely, I would have hoped, do their due diligence on that. And he stayed in football shape, but I don't know how to really feel about this until we see it. Because there's a lot of potential with this. Like, Darren Waller is a very talented, very gifted player who can do a lot of different things for this offense. And honestly, I'm excited to see all the things that they can. If you blitz us, it's not going to work out. Like, Darren Waller is a matchup nightmare when it comes. If you cover him with a safety, it's just not going to work. Or a linebacker. And the Dolphins have so many weapons that they can just get a matchup whenever they want to. And if this offensive line is as good as I think it can be, then they're going to have time to take those shots and get those matchups and exploit them. So listen, I don't know how to feel about this trade. It could go south real easy, okay? I'm not saying it can't. But, yeah, I'm excited to see what he can do. He's a very gifted athlete, and he's a very good football player. Like, he's a great route runner. He can play a lot of different positions. And he can dominate in the red zone as well. So, and like I said, I'm excited to see what Tua can do with a player like that, who is big and as physical as he is. Who his catch radius is, he's literally got go-go gadget arms. Like, Tua can put it in a lot of different places, and we know that Tua is really good at ball placement, and have him just make plays. So, I'm excited about the prospects of Darren Waller. It's only a 1-year deal, and who knows what happens, man? Maybe he makes a Pro Bowl. Maybe he has a really good season with the Miami. And he's not going to be counted on like he was with the Giants and some of those other teams. Plus, this team's much better than those teams. So I'm excited to see what we can do with Darren Waller. Also, like, all the Mike McDaniel hate that with the whole Ramsey situation, I'm glad that the reports came out and some of the articles that are out there about what really went wrong with him is like, yeah, like, of course, the Dolphins would want to move on from a player like that. But there is one last news story that we have to talk about, and that is it's very loose. I wouldn't even call it credible. But before all of this nonsense went down, Keenan Allen was mentioned that some kind of Dolphins connection with ESPN, which I thought was really, really interesting. Obviously, another older player who, I don't know. The Dolphins, I really like the Dolphins receiving room. I like Malik Washington. I like Westbrook and Keenan. But Keenan Allen is another guy who you can do a lot with him in the slot, and could potentially be a matchup nightmare. This was reported by ESPN.
It was mostly just like, oh, that this could be a really good fit for Miami. There really not a whole lot of more credible uh, like connections there, but it would be interesting if Keenan Allen. I think would be a good signing. Uh, someone who's great at who's been in a lot of timing offenses with pocket passers and has really excelled and succeeded in those offenses. And he still is a really good player. Even he was uh, still good with Chicago. A lot of things went wrong in Chicago last year for a lot of different reasons, and him in this offense would be a perfect fit. We think about throwing to areas and timing and just knowledge of the game. I think he would not only be great for the on the field, but I think he would be good in the receiver room and add another veteran presence who's a good one. And I've always really liked Keenan Allen. I remember when he was coming out in the draft, I really wanted the Dolphins to pick him, and obviously they ended up passing on him. I think we ended up drafting like Rashard Matthews. I believe Keenan Allen went to Nevada, if I remember. But yeah, so one of my favorites in the league, and I would totally I would be very excited if the Dolphins were able to get a player like that. They don't need it, that's for sure. They need a corner more than anything. So I don't know how much credibility this has, but it would be cool. And we don't really have any updates on corners, so it's gonna be interesting. The Dolphins have to fill that void there, and I think the cream of the crop, the big golden crown, would be Asante Samuel. I think he fits the scheme to a T. He would obviously he's coming off a pretty bad injury, so he would have to stay healthy, and that's something that's like really hurt his career. But when he's healthy, he's a phenomenal ball hawk. He has a great ability to close distances in short areas, which is what you have to do. The Dolphins love playing cover two, and that's a perfect physical trait for that defense. So that would be great. Um, yeah, overall, I'm happy with it. I'm not thrilled with the Darren Waller thing because it's just a very murky mess of a move. It's like, okay, we don't really know how it's going to work out. It has a lot of potential. I love the idea of him in this offense and the things that he could bring to it, but we'll see what happens. Like, he's a strange guy, so I don't know. He still physically got it though. He has not lost a step. He has had a terrible injury history throughout his career, and that's what's really held back some of the stuff. So there's a lot of question marks with this trade, and I don't know, but it does give the Dolphins potentially a phenomenal playmaker at that position, and they got Minka Fitzpatrick from the pit. Like, dude, that is crazy to me that they were able to pull off a trade like that, and who has no guaranteed money left on his deal, which is crazy. Who's the best? In my opinion, is still the best player at his position. And he's one of my favorite players in the NFL. So this is awesome. The Dolphins got a first-team All-Pro player, and I know that Omar tweeted something like, "Oh, look at Jalen Ramsey has the same accolades." They are not at the same place in their career. Minka Fitzpatrick is still in his prime. Jalen Ramsey is not in his prime anymore, and I don't know why people still think that. He is a very good toolbox player still, I guess. Like if you play, he's more of a slot corner than he is an outside corner at this point in his career. Maybe you can play him at safety. But he's not. I guess if he's a slot corner, he's a top. I would say, yeah, he's one of the best in the NFL. But yeah, Minka Fitzpatrick can still make a first-team All-Pro team, and he's only 28 years old. So I don't know. To me, the Dolphins got by far the best player in the trade, and on a very good contract. And this is a player that can still be a part of something for the next 3 years, as opposed to Jalen Ramsey. It's like, where's Jalen Ramsey going to be in the next 3 seasons? Who knows? He's probably not even going to be a Steeler. So anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed. Uh, I would give this trade an A+. The Darren Waller is like incomplete. I'm not like I'm kind of lukewarm on it. I don't know. Maybe I don't know. They probably won't try to get another trade for another tight end. Obviously, I think the dream scenario would have been Kyle Pitts, but Darren Waller again. There's a lot of potential there, and I'm not worried about his age because, like I said, there's a lot of tight ends that have had success at that age, and I still think I don't think he's lost a step in terms of what he can do on a football field, and he's a very unique, gifted tight end. If he's healthy and if he's dedicated. So that's it. I hope you guys enjoyed, and I'll see you guys in the next one.